Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. A former special agent for the FBI and diplomat is sounding the alarm over what he calls the Achilles heel in our national security and counterterrorism mission. James Conway Jr. spent 25 years with the FBI. He was appointed to a diplomatic post at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, Office of the Legal Attaché, where he served as program manager of international counterterrorism and counterintelligence matters until 2006. He is now president and managing director of the consulting firm Global Intelligence Strategies, Inc. Welcome to Newsmax TV, James.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Many people don't raise an eyebrow when the topic of Latin America and terrorism are lumped in the same sentence. Tell us exactly, how is terrorism rooted in Latin America, and exactly what threat does it pose to the U.S. and our interests?
Terrorism is an issue that I believe needs to be front and center for policymakers and lawmakers in Washington. There's a growing presence of Islamic activism and fundraising in Latin America. There's significant presence of human trafficking organizations that terrorist cells have and could exploit for movement of people and materials into the United States. And that should be a significant concern to us from a national security perspective. Now,
on September 11th, you were a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and at that time you looked south. How did you come to identify the threat there, and just how vulnerable is the U.S. to it right now?
In our terrorism investigations, both here domestically in the Texas area as well as throughout the United States, oftentimes we found common denominators and linkages to Mexico, the tri-border area in South America, Central America, and other players that exist in Latin America. So for that reason, it brought our attention to that particular part of the world.
Now, tell us exactly which terrorist groups are involved, exactly what are they doing?
There's a number of terrorist groups, starting with Sendero Luminoso, the FARC, Zapatistas, many terrorist groups that exist in Latin America that are domestic Latin American terrorist groups. But in my view, those groups don't represent a specific threat to our national security. I think when you get front and center, what you really have to pay attention to are those groups that pose a threat to us. And those are the Islamic fundamentalist groups such as Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda al-Islamiyya, and those groups. We have seen a significant presence of those folks in Latin America, particularly Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the #1 and the most prolific terrorist group in the world. It's a proxy for the Iranians and the Syrians. It's funded to the tune of $100 million a year. And it's got a significant track record. If you go back to all the way back to 1982 with Colonel Higgins and the kidnappings and the explosions and bombings of U.S. facilities, embassies, and annexes in the Middle East, the Marine Corps barracks, the Khobar Towers, the specific Hezbollah targeting of the Israeli embassy and the Israeli Amia or Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires back in the 1990s, really brought to the forefront the presence of Hezbollah in Latin America and its threat to Western targets, including the United States. Latin America, and in particular the tri-border area, has been a front and center issue. Approximately 25,000 Middle Easterners live in the tri-border area. It has become the smuggling and fundraising center in this part of the world for Hezbollah. We know that Hezbollah raises about $100 million a year through its activity there in the distribution and creation of counterfeit products. Everything from counterfeit currencies to counterfeit CDs, DVDs, clothing, and so forth and so on.
What can you tell us about Iran's role in all of this?
It's an issue that's of concern, and I think it boils down to this. Iran's presence in Latin America is significantly growing, and there's a coalescence of things coming into play. We're seeing a reversal in democratic governments in Latin America. We're seeing a lot of governments moving to the left. We're seeing a growing relationship between Venezuela and Hugo Chavez and Ahmadinejad of Iran. We're seeing the growth of Iranian diplomatic presence in Latin America, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Bolivia, Chile, Brazil. So that's of concern to me. In my view, where you have Iranian diplomatic presence, you have the presence of Hezbollah.
If there is a conflict ultimately between the U.S. and Iran over its nuclear program, or perhaps even Israel and Iran, what do you think would happen to U.S. interests in Mexico and South America?
Well, I'm concerned. I'm also concerned about targets in the United States. Look, Hezbollah has significant presence in Latin America, Central America, Mexico, as well as the United States. I mean, anecdotally, we've seen evidence of cells, Hezbollah cells being taken down in Charlotte, in the Midwest, in Toronto, right in our own backyard. So that's of concern to me. When you look at it from 30,000 feet, all of this saber rattling going on, and the fact that they have surrogates or proxies in the form of Hezbollah all throughout Latin America, as well as the United States, gives me pause for concern.
How should we be fighting the war on terrorism to our south? And in your opinion, by failing to take a more aggressive approach in securing our borders, is the U.S. turning a blind eye to the threat of terrorists and, in effect, welcoming them to our country with open arms?
Well, you know, in my view, border security equals national security. I think that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. How do we do that? We do it very successfully, and I did this along with my colleagues, working on bilateral operations as FBI agents and other members of the intelligence community in the U.S. do. We work bilateral operations with our host government partners, whether it be Brazil, Chile, Argentina, or in the case when I was assigned to Mexico. I mean, we work right alongside, shoulder to shoulder, with our partners in those countries. It has to be a bilateral operation. FBI agents can't go overseas and run around unilaterally and work counterterrorism issues. The big concern I have right now in Mexico is that Mexico, if anybody has read a newspaper lately, Mexico is virtually on the edge of civil war down there. And my concern is that we're going to lose the ability to conduct those bilateral operations. We're going to lose our partnerships because the Mexicans have their own ball of wax right now, and they are so focused on issues involving street violence, kidnappings, and violence related to the cartel wars that are going on down there. I just don't know how many resources the Mexican intelligence services and federal police can give us in our assistance of looking at and conducting counterterrorism operations in Latin America.
All right, James Conway, thank you so much for your time and for all the good information. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.
Sarah Palin's new book, Going Rogue in American Life, will be released on November 17th. You can be among the first to get your copy. Check out our incredible free offer for Sarah's new book. Just go to Newsmax.com and click on the top banner for this great offer. Act today.